Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest back on for probably 5, 6, 7 times now at this point. Again, I try to get him on here at least twice a year and just touch base on where he's at in his prep and just like we're talking off air, any new interesting hypertrophy topics that we didn't think were important, but not important, but that we didn't think would be issues or potentially issues again. So we get to touch base on that. Dr. Eric Helms, thanks for coming on, man. Excited to chat with you and catch up.
Jeff, it's always a privilege. Thank you for having me back on, man.
Yep. Always super gracious with your time. And I know you're a busy guy, so really appreciate you hopping on here. Always, you're like right away, you're like, yeah, man, I'd love to come back on. So I love that. Make it easy on me. So what we were talking about off air, I know that you're not deep in prep, but you are in the early stages. How's that going? How far in are you? And I think you said you're competing sometime in October-ish timeframe.
Yeah, I started prep mid-April and taking it nice and steady and slow because we did a really good job of staying lean in the off season, appropriately lean, and starting a good pre-prep phase. I began prep pretty lean. I think I also made some progress in the off season. So the stage weight we are predicting is probably an over prediction, which is a good place to be. You get ready early, you just get to eat up. So the first planned show is WNBF Taiwan, first weekend in October. And then I have the Muscle Mayhem Pro-Am that is the first weekend in November, if I recall correctly. And then 2 weeks later, there is WNBF Worlds, where I'll be going back to. As far as how things are going, they're good. If we're projecting 80 kilogram roughly stage weight, and I'm a kilo or two up from there, it'd be awesome. Then I am only 4.5, 5 keys or 10, 11 pounds over stage weight at the moment. And yeah, so we've got heaps of time left, another week in June and all of July, August, September before I'm going to be in stage shape. Yeah, things are on track for sure. My weigh-ins are in the 84s, a few in the 85s after refeeds, and my performance in the gym is holding really steady. Physique's looking the best it ever has, and prep is just kind of day to day. I'm not thinking about it too much, to be 100% honest. It's ticking boxes. I
Yeah.
think at the end of this season, it will be oh God, I'll be close to doing 20 shows. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Seasoned vet at this point. That's awesome. Like you said, it almost is kind of like checking the boxes. And I'm sure obviously at this point, the beginning of it's a little bit easier as you before you dig deep, which sounds like you may not have to dig as deep potentially. Now, I know one thing I heard you mention, I don't know if you just said it here, but so you're expecting to come in a little bit heavier this time around potentially?
That's what it's looking. Yeah.
And is that, would you put that from just building more muscle? What you think is pretty much going on there with that?
Yeah, I think I had a successful offseason. So I actually moved the needle to the point where it is going to actually show up on the scale. Obviously, we always try to push the conditioning further, but realistically, when I look back at my 2023 physique, I think the same level of conditioning will look leaner this time just because that's what happens when you have more muscle pushing against the same amount of fat. And I think that is something that a lot of competitors don't really get in the early stages. If you want to look that crazy, hard, grainy, deep grooves in certain areas, striations, there's genetic components to where you store body fat. There's components to how flat and how much muscle do you lose to get to that point to look that way. And sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And then there's frankly just how much muscle mass do you, and then how good are you at peaking at that point. So I think sometimes competitors get to a level of leanness that is comparable to the top level pros, but they just don't have the same look. And it might be slightly differently in distribution. They're not quite as good as quote unquote showing it for all those other reasons. And I think I can display better conditioning this year, even if I'm not technically leaner, which is cool because I'm carrying more muscle.
Do you think there's anything to, as you train longer and as you age, do you think there's anything to that, like muscle looking any different or anything like that? Do you think that is something like there's something to that?
The muscle maturity, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I find that my muscle now makes better financial decisions and it's less quick to react emotionally when it is on social media, and it is more often willing to compromise with other people. So I've definitely experienced muscle maturity from that perspective. No, but in all seriousness, there might be. So I think for one, as you become a more experienced competitor, you get more in tune with a number of things that can make you look denser, harder, and leaner, even though you haven't necessarily changed your stage weight that much. Some of that is knowing just from trial and error what you should and shouldn't do in the final weeks and how to come in looking appropriately, not too flat, not too full and spilled over. A huge part of it is just getting better at getting leaner and incurring less stress in that process. So you look a little less beat up, which sometimes looks like mild levels of water retention, or you're just so jacked up by the end of it that you're inconsistent as far as your ability to handle the peak week process, get a pump. Your thermoregulatory systems are better, so you can show vascularity and get it. Just all the little things that make a physique look quote unquote right and healthy. But I am not willing to completely discount the notion of there just being some kind of age related thing. I don't think it is just, I think it's a quality of muscle, though. I think that's where bodybuilders get it wrong. There's baby muscle versus a older muscle, and something about the older muscle looks better. If anything, it's probably the opposite as you get more like fat infiltration as you get older and older. I don't think that's happening in stage ready bodybuilders, regardless of age, but markers of muscle health don't go up with age, they go down. However, one thing that does happen is you do lose actual skin thickness, which is a pro and a con. So you lose some of the elastic properties as you age, and the skin actually gets thinner. And there's probably a point, and I noticed this anecdotally, where that is not starting to cause visual issues and maybe giving you a visual benefit. That's probably in your 40s and 50s, assuming you haven't lost a huge amount of weight. But I've seen it time and time again when you look at masters competitors who are especially like over 60, even though they didn't used to be really heavy, they have certain areas where the skin is a little like sagging off their muscles, like under the pec or in their lower back or like the kind of bottom fold of their glute. Some of that is due to a little bit of muscle loss compared to when they were their biggest, but I've even seen it in people who've maintained pretty good size. You can just see little hints of it in spots, and I think it is just due to a loss of elasticity. But you go back 10, 15 years prior to that, when they're in their 40s and 50s, there may be this kind of optimal peak of loss of thickness, but not enough loss of elasticness to where you are just being able to see what's underneath the skin a little bit better. I'm not ready to count that out, but I think that is probably a much smaller component to all the other things I talked about, which makes more seasoned competitors better at looking denser, harder, and more peaked, which could be interpreted as muscle maturity, if you will.
Yeah, and it makes sense. You talk about the skill dieting, like that makes a lot of sense too. It is a big skill component too that I don't think a lot of people think about. And then I'm assuming that the other part of that is just if you're someone who is getting lean like that and you're obviously probably consistent with your weight training, you're probably just continuing to just add more muscle over time too, which is going to be helpful as well too, right? Someone who's been training for 15, 20 years is probably just going to have more muscle than someone who just started when they're younger in their 20s. So I'm assuming that probably is a big part of it too.
I mean, if they look bigger, yeah, but I think a lot of the times in the more nuanced conversations in bodybuilding circles is when you see two competitors who are of similar size, but one is in their 40s and one's in their late 20s, and they don't have the same level of look. But you might still see, okay, they both have glute striations, but there's just a graininess to this guy's physique that person doesn't have. Most of the time, I would say 8 out of 10 times, it's just they're not actually as lean, but they're muscular enough to show those dents. And people have a black or white view and they're not too familiar with bodybuilding, like stage conditioning of what truly elite levels of conditioning are. Like just because you have some striated glutes doesn't mean you're actually as lean as you can get based upon your body fat distribution. And many people will look worse trying to get leaner there because they end up flattening out too much. They lose muscle. They try to diet too fast to get that last little bit of conditioning rather than marinating on it. And that's something you either get from a good coach or you learn from experience. So I think, yeah, like the whole muscle maturity thing is independent from how much muscle do you have in those conversations. But absolutely, the more muscle you get, the leaner you're going to look at a higher body fat percentage.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, it comes down to the skill, like you said, but then also that peak kind of time of the skin elasticity, like you were talking about there, like that peaking potentially at the right time. That's super interesting. You mentioned like less stress, like from dieting and things like that. What are some things that you've learned over the years to help mitigate some of that like stress from dieting?
Don't let the contest prep diet live in your head rent free. I think that's the main thing. I remember my first year, I was, for good reason, super passionate and excited about bodybuilding in a way that was both conducive and not conducive to my progress. I was thinking about it 24/7, and that makes every day take longer. And then as you start to get hungrier and more lethargic, you ruminate on that experience. The best parallel is like when you look at an animal that has lost a limb, they don't get depressed, or especially if they're born without the limb. And this is actually true of human animals too. Animals are much less likely to have narratives around the thing that happened that compounds the issue. Like, how many times do we see someone gets a lower back injury or a relatively serious ouchie in lifting, and then they just don't train anything? Like, you hurt your back, but you're not doing leg extension, leg curl, bicep curl, lat pull downs machines because you're depressed, because you can't train the way you want to, or you're worried that this is the way it's going to be forever. And that rumination, that stress, it is 90% of the problem, while the injury itself might resolve in 3 months and be a drop in the bucket. You'll forget sometime 10 years from now. is only 10% of the problem. So it gets so much worse. And I think bodybuilders in their early career stages or with certain personality types, they really suffer from that a lot. And it also leads to poor decision making. You get this ever narrowing focus on getting leaner and leaner. And sometimes people will do that at the expense of muscle mass, fullness, social life, a lot of stuff. They run either too high of a deficit or they get hyper focused on, oh, I'm flattening out too much. I'm losing muscle. I need to be big enough. You shift back and forth between these extremes of, I need to get shredded to be competitive, but I need to be big to be competitive. And then people will sometimes either under or over diet, depending upon their personality, strengths, weaknesses, and they get in their own way. So the more contest preparation experience you have, and I think coaching experience helps too, because you just see the vast variety between individuals and just exposure to the sport. You learn that the best tool to make a diet easier and to enhance fat loss is just having a life that's outside of bodybuilding, having things to do. And I'm not trying to make it sound easy, but you want to reduce the number of decisions you make during contest prep. And one of the things that really alleviates that is that your lifestyle should look qualitatively very similar between in season and off season. Like I live the bodybuilding lifestyle. My lunch, my breakfast, my dinner, my post workout shake, and my before bed meal of just like Greek yogurt, that has been the same for years. And the difference between the in season and the off season is the timing's still the same. My daily structure's still the same. And the major components of those meals are the same. It's just the carbohydrate and fat proportion and sources shift. So I moved to leaner sources of protein and I moved to fewer numbers of fruit or portion sizes of carbohydrates, or I replaced those carbohydrates with vegetables during prep. And that's it. As far as like my day to day, I do a few things behaviorally to adjust to try to get a higher step count. And then I auto regulate and modulate it. And I fall within a given range of calories in basically three different phases. There's my range of calories off season, there's my range of calories low days, and there's my range of calories on high days. And those you wouldn't know unless I told you, like, oh, okay, I see you've got two pieces of fruit. He must be in the off season on a refeed day instead of that one piece of fruit. Oh, and you're choosing an Asian pear and a banana. Okay, wow. Well, that's actually 60 grams of carbs right there. Oh, you're choosing a 125-gram punnet of blueberries. That's 18 grams of carbs, right? So there's a pretty big distinction there, even though it looks like I'm just having fruit at lunch. And I think that makes it very easy from the perspective of, like I said, managing stress, which makes fat loss easier and makes the days go by. You look up, you do other things like you're not ruminating on individual scale weights. You're looking at a 10-day average or a 14-day average. And if you get up at 5 a.m. and you have to do something like, I'm not going to weigh in today, this is bad data. So you don't let that get in your brain. I think knowing yourself and knowing the things that have gotten you hung up in the past and knowing which things really do matter and which things don't, and just learning to set it and forget it while still having someone looking over your shoulder and having some kind of guardrails in place as you get progressively like narrow in your focus. Like even though I have or will have 20 shows under my belt after this season, if I did my math right, and I've coached more than 100 people to the stage, I'm still a victim to my own perspective and my own biases, and I can't get outside of my own head. We often hear the adage that sometimes coaches are the least coachable people, and I strive to not be that guy because you're overthinking things. And so for me, I always have someone in my corner, and I definitely know that my decision-making skills get progressively worse. And then and I know my tendencies. I have a tendency to push the conditioning too hard, too fast, and to get uber focused on coming in shredded, sometimes at the expense of other things, either physically or mentally or socially. So I basically outsource some peer review on that, is essentially the way I think an experienced bodybuilder thinks of that. And we agree on a game plan, but it is very much outcome oriented rather than X's and O's oriented. And as far as the coaching relationship, that's another topic. But anyway, I think that's the way that stress ends up influencing things. There is the actual influence on maybe water retention, social stress, and just rumination leading to poor sleep that can actually indirectly affect your physical outcome. But for the most part, what I think it is that influences your decision making, and then you make poor decisions and you over or under diet because you are overly stressed.
Yeah, there's the physiological aspects of it, but what you're saying is the psychological ones end up leading to those really end up being the big things, either pushing too hard one way or the other from that perspective. And I'm assuming too, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Is there that point in terms of leanness, where it's like things get a little bit more noisy in terms of scale weight, right? And you almost have to go off of look. And I could see where that could be a huge stressor for people. And that's where they could lead themselves astray. And I know you talked about that earlier, where you potentially try and over condition yourself or try to push yourself at that point in time.
No, that's very insightful, Jeff, and it's super true. Essentially, it depends upon how lean you start. But if you start at a quote unquote good position, you're starting prep, let's say 10% over stage weight, then this is pretty true that you're looking at a 50-50 mix of scale weight and physique at the start of prep. And then it shifts to being like 90-10 physique scale weight. And when you're not starting that lean, let's say you're 15% or even 20% over, which is not uncommon, then it's 90% scale weight at the start. And you're just like a lot of the times when I work with competitors, unless they're first timers and they have reasonably experienced, but they're, in my opinion, they didn't have an optimal off season. They're not starting as lean as they would like, or I would like, or they had misconceptions about how long it takes to get lean. And we've talked through that, but nonetheless, they've come to me and they're like, listen, I need to lose 30 plus pounds and I'm a middleweight or a lightweight to get in shape. That's not uncommon, but it should be uncommon. And often that's an indicator that they don't know how to live the bodybuilding lifestyle. There's a big disparity between what they do in prep or out of prep, or the prep is so invasive that they can't help but gain weight in the off season and they struggle with the recovery phase. In those cases, it's almost like, hey, listen, go on a reasonably aggressive diet, call me in 8 weeks. We're going to then bring your calories up, do a diet break, and then we're going to lose slow. You don't really need my guidance. You're not going to lose muscle. You have a lot of fat to lose. Here's the program, set and forget. If something comes up, hit me up. But I just want you to run 1,000 calorie deficit for 2 months because I would like to see you lose the first 15 pounds quick, and then we'll take a diet break, and then we'll actually start prep where I would have otherwise liked you to have. So I think that is the one modifying factor. But the principle is that early on in the diet, when you're higher in body fat, you're going to need to, and you should focus on the scale weight more because the tweener phase, like when you're going from, let's say, 20% to say 15% body fat, you flatten out and then you can't really see any muscle definition. So
Yep.
you just look smaller.
Yep.
And you think I'm doing something fundamentally wrong. This is not good. I'm losing weight, but I'm not seeing anything. And that can be like frustrating psychologically. And that is a phase you just want to ignore and just focus on the scale. But the exact opposite is true when you're at the end, like you said, like bowel movements start to become far less consistent. And there's something I've talked about in another podcast, which is nothing that everyone actually, and no one wants to hear this, but I'm going to tell them anyway. There is a rhythm to how long are you accumulating feces in your body before you actually take a dump, and it slows down. So if you're someone who peak off season, you're taking 2 craps a day, you're living life, the pipes are cleaning themselves regularly. You will probably get down to the point where you're taking a crap every other day. And if you're someone, and these are both within the realm of normal, twice a day or once every 2 to 3 days, in just general humans, regardless of dieting effects or anything, that's totally normal. So if you're someone who in the off season takes a dump every other day or even once a day, you might be down to twice a week or 1.5 times per week. So then you think about it, you're eating this food. It is accumulating in your GI tract. There's less of it, don't get me wrong, and your sodium's lower, but you're going to be gaining about a pound of poop per week. And if you're losing it 0.5 pound of body fat, and you're also having high days, which invariably have higher sodium, a little more water retention, glycogen-bound water as well, it's not uncommon to see 2 weeks go by where it looks like your weight is stabilized or even going up, when at the end of prep, you're only trying to lose a small amount. Like at the end of prep, 200, 300 calorie deficit tops is probably where you want to be. And that's why losing the first 20 pounds, then losing the last 5 pounds can sometimes take not the same amount of time, but certainly disproportionate amount of times, right? That's 1/5 of your weight loss, but it might take the whole final third of prep to lose those last 5 pounds. And when you're doing that, when you're only anticipating, if you could, make all non-body composition changes be erased from the scale just told you grams of fat mass, you would be seeing yourself losing, let's say, 20 grams of fat per day, 20, 30 grams of fat per day. Your scale weight would be going down a little bit each day, but that's not what you're actually going to see. You're going to see these water and poop related swings in body weight that are greater than the change you're trying to see. So sometimes it takes 3 weeks for that to show up. And when you're crazy, you're trying to lose the last 5 pounds, meaning you actually already have split hamstrings, separated quads, abs, and you're just trying to get like striated glutes and fully split hamstrings and cross-striated quads. You will be in a place where you're like, fuck, it's not working. And you'll drive the deficit up higher. You'll flatten out more. You might get that lean look you want, and you might be able to force the scale weight down, but you don't want to be seeing visible scale weight changes on a week to week basis when you only have 5 pounds of subcutaneous fat left on your body. So that is a confounding factor, and I think that's a tough one that a lot of competitors struggle with. And a big issue is just not having enough time. And an even bigger issue is that the cause of that is not what you do in prep. Successful preps are set up in the off season, and that is another thing. Just to go back to why do I think things are going? Is I was very intentional with setting up my off season quite well this time. Like 2019, I did an excellent pre-prep phase, and I was able to eat up in my shows for months. And then 2023, I had a really good prep and a good off season, but I started heavier and I just gave myself longer. And I'm getting the best of both worlds now to where I've had a really good off season and a good pre-prep phase. And I started even leaner than 2019 with more muscle. So I have just been chipping away at perfecting that process so that each phase is optimally leading into the next. And I'm not going to lie, that's hard because you are going to need to restrict yourself to some degree, exert some dietary restraint as you transition from in season, where of course, you're doing a ton of dietary restraint, to the recovery phase, where you're trying to alleviate yourself from dietary restraint, to then the off season, where you think there shouldn't be any. But the reality is, when you're chasing elite conditioning and when you are committing to like bodybuilding at the professional level, you accept that, okay, prep, there's going to be a 7 out of 10 restraint at some point when I'm digging. It is what it is. The fact that I'm getting on stage naked will make that, it's not easier per se, but it's just not an option. And I think that the switches just doesn't allow many experienced competitors to blow a prep in most cases when they're committed and they're still focused on competing at the highest level or being their best or whatever their narrative is. But the recovery phase, it's very easy to rationalize eating more and gaining weight faster than you should. Even though you are in a surplus, even though you are recovering physiologically, it should be less stressful. But it's difficult to, after holding this like 7 out of 10 restraint for so long, to then go, I only need to hold a 4 or 5 out of 10 restraint just for 2 months. And then it'll come down to a 2 or 3, but it never really goes away. And then the off season, it might still be, if you're trying to stay reasonably lean, but not non-productively lean. It might still be like a low grade 2 or 3 on some days restraint level that you need to maintain. And there's mini cuts, so you can alleviate that. You could go, you know what, I'm going to be a little bit heavier, then bring it back down. Whatever like net area under the curve is most sustainable, you have to align yourself with. And this is easier for some, a lot harder for others, and sometimes not worth it. Sometimes for certain people, with behaviorally and potentially even physiologically, especially if they had like maybe a history of being heavier, trying to stay too lean just makes the whole offseason unproductive. It just feels like I'm always in prep. And that you have to avoid. The goal of a successful pre-prep phase is to start prep, starting your diet, not feeling like you're already dieted. And that's the rubric. That is the litmus test, if you will. So if you did a little bit of a diet, let's say you're starting prep in January, right? You did a diet in October, and then November, December, you're at maintenance, you're eating up. When you start prep in January, the goal would have been to barely gain any weight, maybe a pound over those 2 months, and then start prep not feeling restrained. And then you've done it right. And I think getting that combination of dominoes to fall in the right order and to have not only the body composition you want, but also the level of mental stress where you want it to be, can take decades sometimes to get right.
So for you, did you not have to do that kind of pre-prep phase this time because you stayed a little bit leaner? Am I hearing that correctly?
No, I did it. It just
You
went
did.
well.
Okay.
Yeah. So to walk you through my body weight progression, I hit a peak off-season weight of, and I'll speak in American, 201 pounds or 91.4 or 5 kilos. And then we cut down to, I think, 87 and a half, 88. So essentially, I lost 6 or 7 pounds from there. So I cut to the mid 190s, and then I let myself get back up to 4 pounds heavier than that. So essentially, I started prep just at about what I would say is 15 to 20 pounds over stage weight, which for a guy who competes historically at 175 pounds, but hopefully closer to 178, 179, maybe even 180. We'll see. On stage, that's a pretty good place to be. And if, let's say you were a lightweight competitor, stage weight's 150, you probably knock 3 or 4 or 5 pounds off that to get the equivalent of where you'd want to be. If you're your stock standard 165 pound stage weight male competitor, then yeah, it's like just basically 5 pounds or 4 pounds less than that for all those numbers is where the quote unquote ideal might be.
So you mentioned you got up to 201. And you stayed a little bit leaner this time. What was it previously? Where did you get up to in the past?
Yeah, I historically have started preps between 210 to as heavy as 220, although that was kind of like early career struggling with the off season. Yeah, I started my 2023 prep most recently at 96 kilos, which is basically 13 pounds heavier than I started this time.
Gotcha.
So that, let me do the math real quick for you. 91 is 200 plus another 11 pounds. So I was like 211, 212 in 2023. And then in 2019, I was only like a pound or two heavier than where I started here. It's actually very similar to what I did in 2019, but I look better. So my body comp at the same weight makes me look more muscular, which is a great sign, right? That's what I was getting at. Is I still did the pre-prep phase, and I just overshot where I wanted purposely to start prep at, did a mini cut, and then I stayed at maintenance or a very slight surplus to start prep right around like your 88, 89, which is like 190, mid 190s essentially.
And with you staying at a lower body weight in off season, does that kind of come back to your kind of your research in terms of the calorie surplus, or is that just again based off your experience of this is where I feel best, and anything more than this I don't think is going to be beneficial in terms of it's not going to add any more hypertrophy, so it's like why would I continue to push body weight more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a combination of these factors. So ironically, if you look at my off-season weights, except for the aberrant 2023, where I started, like I said, around 211, 212, I've started my preps leaner and leaner and leaner and leaner each time. If we just remove 2019, my 2007, 2009, 2011, and 2019, and now my 2025 season, I've been lighter and my peak off-season weight has come down. Like an enhanced bodybuilder would look at that and be like, "Oh man, you're really fucking up."
Getting small.
Yeah. But the funny thing is that my stage weight or condition at the same weight has improved each time. There have been some years where the improvement is not as noticeable, or there has been one body part that improved and another that might have backslid a little bit as I was experimenting with like low volume everywhere, like in 2011. But overall, my physique was still an improvement compared to 2009. And why is your question? And the answer is that it's two things. Bodybuilders, we don't have complete insight into all the physiology that's going on, so we associate things. And that's what you have to do. Like your anecdotes are your most powerful end of one experiment, but they're not controlled. We don't have a twin version of us trying something else. So we associate a given level of adiposity or body fatness or body comp or body weight with when am I my strongest? When do I feel I'm putting on the most muscle? When am I not overstuffed, but I feel good? When do I don't feel sluggish or like I'm giving myself low grade pre-diabetes or anything like that? When is my cardiovascular conditioning good? When can I handle a lot of volume and I'm making PRs in the gym? And when do I look good in a shirt? That's the association of when am I doing well? And that is layered on top of how good am I at living the bodybuilding lifestyle and maintaining an appropriate surplus, and how much am I just rationalizing the fact that I'm eating a lot because I don't like to feel restrained in the off season. Some people, that's not their issue. They stay too lean. You especially see that in some competitors who are very social media focused or have potential backgrounds with disordered eating or restrictant type of approaches. It's historically been more common among female competitors, but that's definitely changing, which is not good. It just means that we're catching up to our sisters in iron with also being jacked up. But the point is that truly, from a physiological perspective, what are the things that are going to dictate our ability to build muscle? And it is primarily having a sufficient energy availability. So not being in a deficit, feeding yourself enough, but also not being below your lower intervention point, or the point at which you are too lean to where your hormonal levels are compromised, your stress levels are higher, you're not generating a baseline level of sufficient leptin so that you're getting really hungry between meals, you're not sleeping well, and you're experiencing a low-grade version of what happens about 1/3 to half of the way through prep, even though you might be at maintenance or on a slight surplus. But I think that's relatively rare. And when you have good control over your behaviors, you can actually identify where that point is. So for me, I can tell like when I am below 88 kilos, 87 kilos, or visually, when I see that I have quad separation but I don't quite have hamstring or glute separation, and I have bicep veins, full abs, that is like right upon, for me personally, the point where if like on that day I'm in a deficit, it might disrupt my sleep. So there's a big difference to that versus when I'm 10 pounds heavier, where it doesn't matter if I'm in a deficit or a surplus, I sleep fine and I feel the same. And then it's not until I get down to that body fat level where I can actually feel the acute changes in surplus deficit and how they affect me. Deeper into prep, I start to notice, oh, I have better sleep on refeed days and the day after, and I have poor sleep on low days. and I can notice that my energy levels are immediately impacted by low calorie days, so long as it's not just the day after a refeed. And eventually it gets to the point where even if I'm on a refeed day or even if I'm on a diet break or at maintenance, I am so lean to where sleep is only going to get so good. I'm probably going to wake up at 4 and I will need to try to meditate to fall back asleep, and fingers crossed that goes well. So there is an interaction between your adiposity relative to where your body quote unquote wants you to be and the size of the surplus or the deficit. And there is really no debating the fact that your surplus size should meet your potential for growth. So, what can we expect as far as how much muscle you can gain in a given period of time? And I had a fantastic off season. I had what I would describe as late stage or mid stage intermediate gains over all of 2024 and into early 2025 before I started prep in April. But even that, we're talking about. So think about it. Put on, let's say, best case scenario, and I don't even know that this is true. This is the advanced dreamer bulk version of rationalization. Let's say it was 5 pounds. Let's say in 12 months I put on 5 pounds. There's 52 weeks, right? What is that per week? How do you track that? What kind of calorie surplus do you need to be in? Now, muscle doesn't have 3,500 calories in it. It has 1,800 per kilogram, actually. But the point being is that it's a very small surplus, and it's something that you're not going to notice. You're looking at month to month, do I have a higher average over time? And yeah, and I think I only had one mini cut besides my pre-prep phase for all of 2024. So I spent essentially 10 of the last 13 or 14 months, because I had an off season that officially started in late November of 2023 and extended all the way until the first week of April 2025. So out of all that, I had 13 months or so, if you don't count the pre-prep or the mini cut, of being in a surplus. So that's great. But if I'm only gaining legitimate 3 to 5 pounds of muscle, best case scenario, you can't benefit from too high of a surplus. Now, how good are you at tracking that? How do you make sure you're not slipping into a deficit too regularly to where it's hampering your gains, and what coincides with your lifestyle? Some people may choose, I want to gain weight faster than that, and I will just take too many cuts. Is that suboptimal? Potentially. You have to think, what is the rate limiter? How much muscle can you truly gain? And if I was doing this as a novice, I would absolutely be gaining probably half as much muscle as I could have, because I'm not feeding the potential for the rate of growth I have when I'm at further from my potential total muscularity. But because I'm so close to my level of muscularity and I'm rate limited in how much muscle I can grow, even doing everything right and providing the highest stimulus, that means I have to be, it would be optimal or ideal if it doesn't interfere with my social life or mental stress or family life or whatever, to have a smaller, almost negligible surplus on a day-to-day basis.
So like for you then with that, how are you measuring that? Is it just off of feel? Is it based off of kind of scale weight in a way? Again, just maybe off of previous like numbers that you've gone off from there?
A bit of all of it. And I would say a big thing that does inform it is scale weight and looking at essentially a running 10-day to 14-day average in the off season. We have a trajectory and a timeline. I think a big thing is looking at timelines. As a more experienced competitor who can't gain muscle as quick and is trying to get really unreasonably lean for the stage, you need to think about roughly over what time course do I want to see my weight do X, Y, and Z, and then roughly over what time course would I want to see it then come back down or go up. So you're game planning going back. Like basically, as soon as we finished my season, I sat down with Brian and we mapped out, okay, here's what the recovery phase might look like. Here's what the off season might look like. Here's where we might do a mini cut. Here's where we might do a pre-prep. And here's what that'll look like if we're targeting shows in October, November 2025. And some interesting things that I experienced was that the muscle gain, while I talked about gaining 3 to 5 pounds over 13 months, it's not like that. It's not a consistent average. It is spurty. So the reason I was able to put on this muscle was because of very effective training, which came from increasing the effectiveness of my exercise selection. So I'm reducing no powerlifting training. Everything is solely focused on hypertrophy for the first time in my career for a long time. I'm doing a higher volume of training, and I'm training closer to failure. And I'm also manipulating things like muscle length. So we pushed basically all the chips to the center on trying to create a stimulus. And what would be quite understandable and expected is that I'm going to see an initial bump in gains as I provide this new novel stimulus. And then as I make those gains, it starts to taper off and slow down. So one wild thing that happened was that I got up to around 88 after seeing my lowest stage weight or sorry, my lowest weigh-in dehydrated like 78.5. So I put on 10 kilograms about twice as fast as we intended. And I was freaking out. But when I got my skin folds done and my body fat tested, like I do regularly, because I have access to it from really high quality optometrists, my sum of skin folds and the way I looked apparent visually and my performance in the gym and how I felt all told me like that was a lot more muscle than it was fat. So if I gained 5 pounds of muscle, I probably gained 3 pounds of it in the first 3 to 6 months of my off season. And that came with a fair amount of fullness, glycogen associated water. Not all of it was raw muscle, but I had similar skin fold as to what I had at 84, 85 kilos. So 10 pounds over stage weight when I was now 15, 16 pounds over stage weight, or what was my previous stage weight. So it was a bit of a jarring experience because you gain weight much quicker than you anticipate when you're gaining muscle because it has a much lower energy density, right? So a kilogram of fat has a little bit over 9,000 calories, like adipose tissue, but a kilogram of muscle in it only has 1,800. So you can see your scale weight go up quickly when you're first gaining weight. And if we all think back to when we very first started lifting weights, we go, oh, hold on. Like I did put on 10 pounds in the first 6 months of training. And I don't think I was really in that much of a surplus. And that's because we're always thinking in terms of that 3,500 calorie rule, like fat. But when you're gaining muscle effectively, you beat the equations many times. You're gaining weight faster than you would anticipate. And sometimes you just look better. So yeah, it's a cool thing, but it was a little bit of a mind F for me because it had been years since I gained weight at a rate that was a good thing. Typically and historically, if I'm in the off season, I'm coming out of recovery phase and I'm gaining weight too quickly, it's because I can't control myself and I'm putting on body fat and I'm trying to rationalize that it's muscle. But that wasn't the case this time. I was on my P's and Q's. I was in a very slight surplus and I was like, there's no way that I'm putting on there's no way I'm in a 500 calorie surplus right now. That's just, I know the limits of metabolic adaptation. I know how accurate I am tracking. And Ryan's like, no, dude, you look better. You look leaner this week and your scale weight's up. So that was an interesting process. And then once that tapered off, then I was like, okay, now things are making a little more sense. But yeah, that's one of those experiences that can get in your head a bit. I was a victim of my own success.
That's super cool. And obviously showing up here as you're dieting down too. You brought up a couple like really interesting things though around like the surplus and stuff like that. I think the thing that a lot of people don't take into account, as you mentioned, was like their current body fat percentage and like how that's a part of the equation, right? That was something that I learned a lot from like you and just others in terms of like how that's people overlook that aspect of it, right? You also brought that up earlier on the way down as well too, right? Where it's like at higher body fat percentages, you really don't need to, you think it's muscle loss, but it's not, right? Like you're in that kind of sweet spot. It's just when you start to get leaner, that's off. But then same thing on the way up, it's like you have that stored energy on your body. And so this was my thought on it. And I'd just be curious to hear what you have to think about this. Since women carry higher levels of body fat, right? Like they need higher levels of essential body fat. Does that change your mind in terms of pushing their body weight up and like really pushing surplus for women in particular? Or does that not change your thought on how to do that?
I don't think it does because you have to look at the higher level of body fat as a lower functional equivalent. So when you have a woman at, let's say, 8 to 12% body fat, which is the equivalent of as shredded as dudes get, they also look shredded. You will see striated glutes on a woman, you'll see split hamstrings. And that's because that essential fat that women carry to support childbearing is not subcutaneous for the most part. So they will look as lean or close to as lean as a male competitor at a higher body fat percentage, which I think is something that a lot of people struggle with. Because also on stage, obviously you will see breasts shrink, but that is something like you're not going on. Like you will sometimes see women who have striated glutes and still have probably like a pound of fat between their breasts. And you will also not be seeing some of those other depots that are not subcutaneous. I think that is something we forget about. We also have data that indicates it's very preliminary, and I hesitate to really kind of lean on it, but the same degree of deficit, or more accurately, energy availability, so how large is the deficit relative to your activity and lean body mass, can prompt more of an adaptive response in women than men. So if people are familiar with energy availability, you can actually calculate it. It is the amount of energy you're consuming relative to your fat-free mass in kilograms after subtracting exercise activity expenditure. So you can get a value like 30 kcals per kilogram of lean body mass. And that is a threshold that has been observed with a lot of variance around it in the literature as a point when you start to see menstrual cycle disruption in women. And that's a rough sign of you're in quote unquote low energy availability. And there's parallels in men, and this is not a sex specific thing. Low energy availability leads to all of the things that we associate with diet fatigue or crash dieting and why we feel like crap. It's basically describing the experience of metabolic adaptation. Metabolic adaptation quantifies the numerical decrease in energy expenditure that is more than we would anticipate based upon body mass changes alone. And those budget cuts, if you will, that your body is making, you feel them and they result in things like poorer immune system function, so you get sick more often, or turning off reproductive function. So you notice your libido drops, you don't get an erection in the morning, your energy levels change. And for women, they stop having a menstrual cycle or it becomes irregular. All of those things burn less calories, but you notice it, right? So, anyway, those things may happen at a lower kcal per kilogram after accounting for exercise expenditure value in men. You see more robust changes in women at a smaller energy deficit than you do in men. So men can maybe run a higher deficit, which makes sense from an evolutionary biology perspective. But there's tremendous variance between women. Some women have lower body fat set points. They're able to get really lean and even on relatively harsh diets, maintain a menstrual cycle. Others, it goes away really early in prep, even if they're getting to bikini levels of condition versus bodybuilding. So I don't want to make it sound like it's a very clear sex difference that affects everybody. There's probably more variation between women than there is on average between men and women. But if you do just look at the averages, that's probably a difference.
Yeah, I've made the point that like women just, it seems like they just have a higher kind of stress response to, like you said, just energy deficits in general, right? Like you said, some people are going to be a little bit different. They'll be able to handle a little bit more. They keep their menstrual cycle. Some people don't. So yeah, it makes sense. It's okay. Obviously, at lower levels of body fat, it's okay. You're going to need to gain some weight to get in that kind of range that we're talking about in terms of building muscle. And so I'm assuming then it's probably the same, right? As that body fat percentage trends up, the need to, if you want to continue to build some muscle, the need for that surplus would go down, correct? Would you be more like, I guess the scenario would be this is something that like in a phase where you're gaining, it's like, all right, you're pretty lean. And again, this just whatever that number is for the person and you gain up and then you get to that kind of level where you feel good. But it's now I feel like if I keep trying to gain weight, I'm not necessarily like it's just going to be more body fat. But I feel like I'm in a good spot, but I want to keep going here with this gaining phase. Would that be a scenario where you would potentially like move that person like to staying closer to maintenance calories, or would you still maybe try to push like a small surplus on there? What would that kind of look like?
No, I would. There's this general nebulous area where you are not too lean to where it is just a consequence of the surplus. And it's very hard for me to justify that it's actually I need to be higher in body fat to make effective gains in the off season past that point. Like that point exists. Like for me, like I was mentioning earlier, if I tried to walk around with cross-striated quads and hamstrings that are split but not glute striations, and I'm like, okay, I'm not in stage weight, I'll be fine, but I'm only like say 8 pounds over stage weight, it just doesn't go well. I've been there. Like I've hung around, I've done the whole eat up reverse diet into shows. I'm walking around shredded, but I'm eating at maintenance and I still don't feel good. I'm not ready. If I did blood work, my testosterone's still in the toilet, even though I'm not in a deficit, right? So you have to figure out what is that threshold point. And it's not really a threshold, but it's probably a range to where that juice is worth the squeeze or it's not quite worth it. Like you can limp along and make a little bit of progress, but you're capped on how good life can be, how well you can recover and how well you can train. And you would be able to build more muscle and potentially then maintain it on the way down if you were 2 to 3% body fat higher. But after that point, once you've clearly got past that little nebulous low end range of not shredded, but not ideally high enough in body fat to make good progress, at that point, it's very difficult to justify, I need to gain another 10 pounds of body fat to make good gains. Rather, those gains that you make in body fat are consequent to whatever the surplus is. And you may need to accept that, and that's fine because you can't just get right above that body fat level that is just on the other side of too lean and then eat at maintenance and expect to make progress. So ultimately, you will have to overshoot your lower intervention point. And by how much, how long, I think that is much more where the behavioral side of it comes in. How often do you want a mini cut? How good is the person at just being like in a 50 calorie surplus on average day to day? If that is something that's intractable or a challenge or they're not that accurate or it makes them feel super restrained, then yeah, gain faster, all good. Just know that every 3 months we're going to need to, or 4 months or 5 months, we're going to need to run a brief mini cut. Probably more accurate, like 4 or 5 months at the minimum. So yeah, like for someone who is quite habituated to this lifestyle and has done all the things we talked about earlier, yeah, like in my case, I can gain 2 kilos over 8 months, half a pound a month. And that's not a problem. It doesn't really institute much stress. I know how to be adaptable in very different environments. And then I run a mini cut. For someone else, that's just not, it's not ideal. Even if on paper it might be. You go, listen, okay, that's all good. We'll do that in half the time and then mini cut earlier. And that's okay, right? You just have to figure out what that formula is for you. But yeah, you can't just sit at your not too lean position and then just somehow body recomp. Because for you to body recomp or be at maintenance and make progress, by definition, you then have to get leaner to do it. And as soon as you start to get leaner, then your body's not going to want to recomp, right? So you just end up spinning your wheels. And I think a lot of people do that because the social media expectations, the desires, and the way that your mindset shifts once you've been shredded is that anything besides stage weight, at least for a period of time in your mind while you're bodybuilding brainwashed, is not lean, right? So you're thinking, okay, yeah, I can be 5, 10 pounds over stage weight, no problem. And it's, you can, but you're not going to make any progress. So for most people, and it's very difficult to accept that. So you find people living this very restrained lifestyle and trying to justify, oh, but there's body recomposition. And they're forgetting that body recomposition is actually the process of losing fat and gaining muscle, which can occur when you have way more than sufficient levels of fat, but it gets progressively less likely as you're experiencing all the things you experience during prep and you don't have the hormonal environment, ability to sleep, and your body's, I'm not going to be easily losing more fat just so you can put on unnecessary levels of muscle. You're not a spring chicken. You're not a novice. There's not a huge demand for me to build this. You already have 90% of your muscle mass. You need to have the appropriate environment and be healthy for me to prioritize that system.
Yeah. Yeah. I think again, just like big thing being people, they don't factor in the body fat percentage in terms of what that kind of what state that puts your body in and like what you can and can't do at that point. Because I definitely seen it where like people are trying to stay way too lean and it's like, all right, you're gonna have to actually freaking eat to build muscle. But I feel like I've also seen it on the other hand where I've seen a lot of people that are on the other end where it's like, hey, I need a surplus to gain, but it's like you're also for men, you're 15, 20% are higher body fat levels than women. It's like you probably see that way less, right? But like 25, 30% are higher. It's for them, it's okay, maybe we don't necessarily need to push that surplus. But I agree. I think a lot of people try to stay too lean and don't eat enough. And then that's where they end up kind of spinning their wheels long term there.
Yeah, 90% of the time when you see someone who's trying to stay too lean or is justifying get too heavy, it's behavioral. And it is like a highly successful, very experienced bodybuilder who is very in tune with things and doesn't have any psychological pathology or even subclinical stuff and hangups around their body or their sport. They can get to the point where they experience, oh, I'm being too lean, or I had misconceptions about how much muscle mass I need to put on because of the crowd I hang in, and I really don't think this is the case. And you will start to hear people later in their career talk about that. And they start to individualize and not listen to the crowd quite as much. And this happens through all phases. Like you might remember when Dirk Emmerich, our client, who is a multiple time lightweight world champion as a pro, he was ready too early. And then he won 2 world titles. And like a lot of the voices in the community who are like, oh, being shredded is really disastrous, it's really hard. They're shredded and they're shredded. And there's shredded for someone who's naturally lean, and they're shredded for someone who's naturally high in body fat. And they're shredded in being in a huge deficit, and they're shredded in eating up. And they're shredded in eating up for 3 months, and they're shredded in eating up for 6 weeks. So instead of just having this kind of very broad brush and actually no experience doing that, some of those voices who were proven wrong by the outcome, if you will, started to realize the differences between individuals and that some of these quote unquote rules are more rules of thumb and things that should be considered, but ultimately have far more context than most people recognize. So one of those ones is how big do you need to get in the off season? And I don't think that framing is appropriate. It is true, like how big do you need to get based upon your current behaviors? And you don't need to get that big. It's just you can't be in a consistent surplus in the off season without getting that big based upon your current adaptation and adoption of the bodybuilding lifestyle. And I don't mean to say you should be doing it differently. I think that's where a lot of bodybuilders get it twisted. Like they look at the pros or the experienced guys or the people who have really integrated the bodybuilding lifestyle, maybe like myself, and they think I should be able to do that or I should do that. But what they're not recognizing is that 10, 15 years ago, I couldn't do this. even if it was optimal on paper and I wanted to. And yeah, absolutely, I would rationalize getting heavier as I'm doing it for powerlifting, or I'm doing it to make faster muscle gains, or you're holding yourself back and I'm gaining a little more muscle and I can just mini cut it. But in reality, I just did not have the behavioral and social adaptations and the nutritional awareness and acceptance of just that I'm living this lifestyle. I'm not trying to be the guy who gets to eat out for dinner and get Italian 4 times a week and also somehow be a bodybuilder. And until I actually accepted that and it stopped being, didn't feel like a sacrifice, it's just what I do, that was just not on the table. I couldn't do it. Just like most people are struggling to be at the body composition they want in society and life. I think many bodybuilders do as well because it is a huge evolutionarily million year adapted system that we're fighting against to try to do that in a modern environment that is
Environment.
not conducive to it. Exactly.
Yeah, the environment. Yeah, that's you summed it up there. The environment's the one that, again, like if you just, like you said, you don't go out of your way to do that and build a skill to learn how to do that. It's like this environment that we're in is going to make it way tougher. Like I know in mass, you've talked about the dual intervention model, and you talk about how like the modern environment just is going to shift everything towards the higher end right now, unless you go out of your way to make that change. But yeah, no, I like that. I'm glad because again, I think this all kind of ties into the dual intervention model in terms of like where do you feel best at, and that is very individual to the person there in terms of who can be leaner. Like I have a client, this guy freaking he gained over 10 pounds in his gaining phase and he just looks lean. Like he wants to do a cut and he just looks like I'm like, you just look leaner at any given time. You're like, this doesn't take away any of your hard work, but it's like, you're just a guy that you're just going to look leaner. And that's just how it is for you. And I think, again, if you can see that, if you just see that on social media, you think like he's doing something different, but it's like he lives a lifestyle, but he also just is able to maintain that a little bit easier. And some people can and some people can't. So do you have a few extra minutes or do you need to hop off? I didn't ask you if you needed to get off right at the top of the hour and we're over it.
No, we're good, man. We can
Okay.
keep going. Yeah.
I just want to ask you a few more questions about your current fat loss phase and a couple things you're doing. Because I know that this is something I'm doing in my current fat loss phase. I'm not prepping for a show or anything, but I am trying to go with a more intuitive approach. I did this over a year and a half ago and I did my last fat loss phase. And I know that's what you're doing too, right? Like you have structure, but you're not necessarily like tracking your calories and macros or anything like that, correct? So I just want to hear how you go about it and what that looks like. I think you kind of already hit on it. It's like pretty consistent with your meals and stuff like that. But yeah.
Exactly. No, that's a great way of putting it. Like when you have a very consistent way of living your life and every day looks the same, you don't need to track it. I know what my day-to-day variance produces. I've gone through it. I've done it in prior seasons. So right now, my day-to-day behaviors produce, if we take the entire range of my most digging restricted low day to my refeeds, it's basically a range from 1,700 calories up to 2,400 calories. And some people may be like, bro, that's a 700 calorie swing. But that is not, if we looked at one standard deviation, now it's a lot tighter. It's like 1,900 to 2,100. And they're also forgetting that there's intentionality there. If I'm hitting a 2,400 calorie day, or even a 1,700 calorie day, I am being purposely restrictive or I'm purposely refeeding. So the decision on where I fall within that range sometimes is just based upon the decision I make in the day. For example, each morning I get up with my wife and we decide where we want to get breakfast. No matter where we go, in prep right now, I'm getting 3 poached eggs, toast, and a side of spinach and a side of mushrooms. That's it. But in some places, they're going to add more fat or there'll be bigger pieces of toast, right? And but that breakfast, it can only swing so much. Those are food items that are very easy to control. There's no oil in poaching eggs. Some places will pre-butter your bread. Most people just give you butter. So if they pre-butter my bread, they give me 2 slices instead of one, and they're big, and I can tell that they used a fair amount of oil to pan fry and saute my mushrooms and spinach. We're looking at a 550 calorie breakfast. But if it's one piece of small toast, and it is pretty much fat free as far as the spinach and the mushrooms. They just pan fried it with a little bit of a spray or a small amount. We're looking at 400 calories, right? So my day-to-day variation for my breakfast can be maybe 100 calories. And then my day-to-day variation for lunch is nil because I eat it at home. It's always the same thing. And then dinner, it's the same deal. Barb and I decide what we want to get, and we'll eat out regularly. But I know how to make good decisions at where we eat out, and we typically eat healthy things. So my dinner spread is a little bit more. That's typically between, say, 400 to 700 calories. And then I have the same protein shake after I work out, and I have the same 2 things of Greek yogurt before I go to bed. So my day-to-day, quote unquote, low days are generally in that 1,700, probably more like 1,800 right now to 2,100 calories. And that's like anywhere between a 100 to a 400 calorie deficit. And on average, that's exactly what I want. And if I am off pace, so if I'm not meeting the pacing requirements we have, then I just am a little more assertive in what decisions we make for where we go to breakfast and where we go to dinner. And I don't like to do it, but what I can do is, hey, babe, oh, you want to get this for dinner? Okay, all good. We can get Thai. I'm just going to make my own food at home. So we go pick up food. I make my food. We eat together. We watch a show. So I try not to make those decisions. I try to make my life just set it and forget it. But if I want to have a refeed day, that's easy. If I want to have a low day, then I have to make some concessions. And the decision of when I make low days happen is based upon my physique progress as well as my scale weight progress at the rate we're trying to get to. And my decision on when to have a high day is as well. If I'm losing too quick, or man, I've had 3 bad nights of sleep, and we don't need to be digging that hard to get where we need to go at this stage. The ideal scenario is that you're ahead of the game so you can slow down the pace when needed. You just don't want to get behind the 8 ball, so you've got to run low days. You've got to run, you're 4 months out, but you're acting as far as how much fatigue you're incurring like you're 4 weeks out. You don't want to be there. And that has to happen if you have to lose 40 pounds to get on stage, not 15. That's how it looks for me. I have the same day-to-day structure, and then I will simply make different decisions on those kind of more variable days as what I'm going to do. So I'll give you an example of a refeed because it's quite easy. When we get Thai food, a lot of the times I will make a decision to get this vegan chicken dish that is not oily, and it is pretty much just green beans, bell pepper, and vegan chicken. So it's like a 300 to 400 calorie dish, right? If I want to get a refeed, oh my God, I order a side of rice. Then boom, I'm getting 50 grams of carbs on top of that. No problem. And then at lunch, I'll have that Asian pear instead of blueberries, and that's another 25 grams of carbs. And then at breakfast, I will eat my wife's leftover fruit that she almost always gets because she likes to get French toast or pancakes, and she doesn't like to eat the banana that they almost always put it everywhere we go. So she's got another just 20 grams, 30 grams of carbs there. So by doing that simple decision and then adding a little bit something to my lunch, I can add 150 grams of carbs to a day, no problem. Easy, right? But it looks really similar on the outside. And if I want to do that 3 days in a row, I can. So I have anywhere between 2 to 3 high days per week, and I will often pull the trigger on starting or doing those high days based upon my weight loss. So for example, right now we have the rough goal of hitting the high 83s, low 84s by the end of June. And I saw a 84.5 on the scale a couple days ago, and that was a new low. And I'm like, we only have half a kilo left to lose in a week and a half. I should probably run a high day. Like, I don't want to get there just yet. We're not trying to push for 83. We're just keeping the same pace and thinking, okay, if this same pace is still working, I will be close to it. So today, 2 days later, I'm up at 84.8. So I'm up 300 grams. Of course, some of that's water, but I'm looking at my averages and my trends, and I can see my physique as well. And I'm going, okay, cool, we're on track. If we see another weigh-in next week in the high 83s or the low 84s, then we're good. So I may not run another high day because there's only 10 days left in the month. Here in New Zealand, we're a day ahead until I see another 84 mid weigh in, something like that. That's kind of the way I do it. And some of the other metrics that we pay attention to are, listen, it's June. I can't be having major sleep disturbances now. So if I have 2, 3, or 4 bad nights of sleep, we just got to shut it down on the low days, and I'm going to have two refeed days because I typically will get a good night's sleep on each refeed day and even the day after. Because like you can't sacrifice sleep and still effectively maintain muscle and lose fat without it coming at a cost. So yeah, and then paying attention to training as well. If your training all of a sudden starts to go in the shitter, you're losing more reps set to set, DOMS is lasting longer, your strength drops. That's also another sign that I'll be like, okay, I'm running things too hard. And then visually, this can take years. And you also have to have a certain level of muscularity to be able to tell it and be lean enough. But you can see flatness. You can see when your muscles don't have the same pop. You can feel when they don't get a pump. You just look smaller and you don't have separation where you normally do to the same degree, even though you look hard. It's difficult to describe to people. You will have this hard, dry look, but you will look muted, smaller, and there still might be a little bit less separation. And when I was just a smaller bodybuilder, let's say my first, second season, where I was carrying probably legitimately close to 10 pounds less muscle, and I also had 10 years less experience, 15 years less experience, I literally just couldn't tell when I was flat. And you talked about some of the differences between men and women. While women do gain the same relative amount of muscle mass over time from when they start, their absolute gains are a lot less, and they're just smaller people. And if you don't have the right attachments, you don't have very much absolute muscle mass, if your body fat's a little higher, it is very difficult to gauge those things. That's why like a lot of bikini competitors, they don't peak because they don't notice a difference and the juice
Yeah.
isn't worth the squeeze. So if those things ought to be in place, or you need to have a coach who can help you tell that. But on a day-to-day basis, I think if you want to do some of this auto-regulated contest prep stuff, you need to be able to discern those things and not have your own insecurities, fears, desire to be shredded early, or like you're just lasering in on seeing, do I have striated glutes yet? And the answer is always going to be, I need another low day until you're 6 weeks out. So you have to be able to know what's appropriate in each phase. So that's the insight into the algorithm that I use. And then every 2 weeks, I'm sending an update. At this stage, it'll probably change every week as I get closer to prep. I'm sending an update to Brian and Berto, and we can have a little powwow, like the three of us. Are we on track? Am I making the right decisions? And I go, hey, guys, here's what I did. Sorry. And yeah, I ran 6 low days, and then I finally saw the scale what I wanted, and I ran 2 high days. And they're like, yeah, I would have done the same thing. Like one thing where I did actually need intervention from coaches, I did a seminar in Malaysia. And I notoriously, when I travel and I do seminars and I connect with people, I get way more steps than I anticipate. I'm paying attention to the social environment and a little bit less to my activity levels. And I'm also being conservative in my nutrition choices because I'm in a very different food environment. So like we'll go out to eat, and every time I will just be like, let me get a side salad and a lean meat. So I'm probably overshooting because I don't know what to expect from the chef because it's not a restaurant that I go to normally. So like for example, I had like Japanese 4 nights in a row, and I had tuna sashimi, miso soup, and seaweed salad. That's like nothing. It's almost a fat-free meal. And in each case, so I came back from Malaysia, and only after 4 or 5 days, and I'd lost 2 pounds. And it looked like a legit 2 pounds. And so Berto was like, hey, I want you to take 3 refeed days in a row. And if you are not seeing the kind of fullness that we want, I want you to take a fourth. So I ended up actually doing five
Wow.
days at maintenance in a row after that trip because I basically did 2 weeks of dieting in a week, in half a week, accidentally. And we were like, we got away with that, but we don't want to be doing that once you're
All the
any
time.
leaner. So that's the type of thing, exactly. That you have to have those skills and those checks and balances in place.
Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. Yeah, because I wonder because it's similar. That's how I feel like I'm doing it too, right? It's like that you almost have that feeling of like, all right, now I'm like super depleted. Understanding that, hey, in a fat like when you're trying to actively drop body weight, like you do want to have that depleted feeling from time to time. But I think in the past, for me, and when I did this approach last time, I just kept pushing through that. Whereas this time, I'm doing what you said, where it's like when I'm really starting to feel that, and like I'm noticing my training's really starting to suffer. It's okay. Hey, now's probably a time to go with a little bit of a higher calorie day, and that's been super helpful to do that. Is that kind of the feeling that you're talking about there? It's like you just feel depleted, and that's once you get to that point. It's yes, we want to get there, but there's that tipping point of if I keep pushing this, that's where I'm going to start to see maybe negative body comp things and just other hunger craving stuff like that.
Yeah, essentially, it is how depleted do I need to be to progress at the rate that I need to in terms of fat loss right now? And when you have more time, when you're earlier in prep, and when you're high in body fat, that answer is not very depleted. But you can also, when you're higher in body fat, if you're high enough in body fat and early on, the answer can be there's not really too much of a downside because I have this quite literal cushion protecting me. I have this other substrate I can lean on. But the leaner you get, you're walking a tightrope on either you will suffer more from being slightly depleted because there's very little body fat left. And you also need to be depleted to a degree to lose body fat. And I think where most people get this wrong early on in their career is they kind of default to, I'll just be depleted. I remember, man, 2009, 11, even 2019 phases of prep where I was just like, basically, Berto describes it like you're a wide receiver and you're just blindly running across to catch. There's somebody behind me. It'll be fine. Let me just catch this. And then you get fucking clobbered. And you do that daily. Or I actually made a decision in 2019 to carve out May as I'm almost diced. I'm like 5 pounds over stage weight. Let's get all the fat loss done, even though that's not ideal because June I have a really busy schedule and we'll eat up and try to repair that damage. You can make decisions like that. You just have to go into it open-minded, or sorry, eyes wide open, because what most people are doing is not that. They are neurotically just pushing, or they run out of time and they have to push. So like right now, I should be sometimes noticing that I'm depleted on a few days. But like I said, I've got 10 pounds to lose. Maybe on a best case scenario, 9 pounds to lose. That's different than when I have 4 pounds to lose. When you have 4 pounds to lose, like you're gonna have to get nasty depleted, but you also need to come in and out of it pretty regularly or just accept the slower rate of loss. I've heard Brandon Kempter and some of those guys in Oz, they'll say they like to deplete, replete, repeat is their approach. And I think that is different than deplete, period, which is what like a lot of the kind of the default setting is for bodybuilders. And historically, what we've done, we had a 12-week prep. I'm 20 pounds over. Okay, shit, pedal to the metal. Let's go. Because that's all you can do. You have limited your options to a unrealistic timeline. And you're hoping that your drug cycle will save you. And then when you share that with the world and it works, great. But you're forgetting that the world is not necessarily running $2,000 of anabolic steroids. And it might just be some 20-year-old with 50 pounds less muscle than you who's doing their natural prep, and they think that's the model. So, yeah, it's a different ball game,
That's it.
for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. It's as you get leaner, it's like you either, like you said, you have two options. Like one, you can go at a slower rate, or you can deplete a bit more, but then that's going to increase your need to get to maintenance at times. But the higher the body fat is, it's like you have a little bit more flexibility with that, and you don't necessarily, you can still use those days if you need them from a mental standpoint, but you can be more aggressive and you don't necessarily need to use them as often. But literally when you get leaner, it's like you have to be either less aggressive, or you can be aggressive, but you have to have days where you're getting out of that. Otherwise you're going to dig yourself deep into that hole. And as you talked about, most people when they're in prep or trying to get lean, they're just going to just, like you said, they're just deplete basically.
Yep.
Cool, man. Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing about that. It's cool that you're able to do that. I think a lot of people think you can't do that. But again, like you said, it's like you need the behavioral aspect of it. I think just the skill, you have a ton of skill doing it, and the awareness and the education too. I think it's all those things that go into it. Awesome. Next time we'll get you back on. I think it will, the kind of time frame will be maybe like right after you compete. So hopefully we'll be paying attention and you'll be looking super lean. And at that point, you'll be on the way back up on there. Good luck with the competitions this time around. Looking forward to it. This is like your first full pro season, or was last, right?
That is correct. Yeah. So in 2023, I turned pro in Australia in October, and then it was only 7 weeks until Worlds. So my quote unquote pro debut was a 7 week half dieting phase, half eating up. So it wasn't a proper pro debut. So
This is
my
the
first time
official.
I've actually, yes, I've had a pro off season before this season. So this is the official, the proper pro debut.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to that. And again, like I said, love to have you on afterwards to chat about it. So we'll be looking at the updates there on that. Before I let you go, is there anything else coming out on your end that you want to let the audience know about? And then where can they find you?
Yeah, so if this comes out before July 1st or after July 1st,
Should.
definitely check out. Okay, cool. Check out the most recent issue of Mass. Of course, only Mass subscribers get to see it. But if you're interested in like this topic of like metabolic adaptation, low energy availability, and how and what the degree to which your body can adapt are, Eric Trexler, Dr. Eric Trexler wrote an awesome article for Mass where he outlined the most extreme studies that have ever been done that have explored the limits of metabolic adaptation. Three historical studies. One, the Minnesota starvation experiment, where during World War II, conscientious objectors got down to quite literally 5% body fat over a 6 month period. They actually did refeeding, and it was a what would be considered a non-ethical experiment today. They weren't allowed to get out once they agreed, and they had buddies and MPs on the military base making sure they adhered. And then there was also two really interesting studies of pretty well-known things. The Biggest Loser, so the reality show where people are losing 150, 160 pounds and looking at the metabolic adaptation from them doing almost constant exercise on a day-to-day basis and running 2,000 calorie deficits. And then finally, the Race Across the USA, which is a marathon from coast to coast almost, which is essentially, it's not a marathon. It's an ultra endurance event where people are running the equivalent of
Marathons.
a marathon every day for 3 to 4 months. So it is the extreme end of exercise energy expenditure and the compensation that occurs from that. And going, okay, listen, if you do all three to yourself, what can you expect? If you try to get the 5% body fat, you're doing a crap ton of cardio, and you're also running a large deficit and you lose a lot of weight, what can we expect and what are the limits and how much can your energy expenditure adapt? And I think it's a really cool article. I enjoyed peer reviewing it.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. It's funny you say that because it's like you take all those things and people are worried about like metabolic adaptation and losing too quickly. But it's like to come back to what we've talked about this entire time, it's like the environment and just kind of how people are. No one really ever has to like worry about those things, I feel like, because it's just like physiologically just too hard to actually happen. Like you really have to go out of your way. So that's awesome. I think he also said he's going to write an article about body fat levels and like what people find the most attractive. And I thought that was interesting. Or maybe that was just me. I know you guys were talking about that on recently.
Oh, that's in there too. Yeah,
Okay.
that's actually one of his other
It's gonna be a
articles.
good
So
article.
yeah,
Good.
Yeah, that not only are you killing yourself to get to this level of leanness that is unrealistic, but people don't even like the way it looks, is what they're going to learn from that article.
Which makes
Yeah.
sense. I definitely can see that. Cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's going to sound like a really good issue, as they all are there. We didn't even get to get into the topics that I wanted, the frequency and the eccentric. We'll have to talk about that next time. But this is another plug for Mass. If they want to read about eccentric chaining and your thoughts on it and what the research says, they can go check out Mass there. Eric, appreciate your time, man. As always, I could talk to you for hours. So appreciate you coming on, and we'll chat with you next time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Did you want to, was there anywhere else where you wanted to lead the audience to? Social media? I'm sure they know where to find you at this point, but I don't know,
Yeah.
like
The
Instagram.
last thing I would say is if people are interested in trying to prep in this manner and creating a little more auto-regulation and individualization, obviously I fully endorse the coaches at 3D Muscle Journey. That's who helps me do this. And we absolutely look to help people develop those kind of long-term career sustainable relationships with the sport. So 3dmusclejourney.com. And then finally, if you want to catch me on podcasts like this awesome one, then make sure to follow my more regular content at Helms 3DMJ on Instagram, which is my primary platform of choice.
Awesome. Cool, Eric. Appreciate your time, man, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, brother.